Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, Erev Chag Sukkot Tov. We're up to the Mishnah now in Daf Tzadi Hey, and this Mishnah is going to address the issue of a man who's married to two women, and one of them took upon herself a commitment to the Lokeach, who bought karka from her husband, that she would not collect her ksuba and be torev from that Lokeach. Misha Yanasui Shtei Nashim, he married two wives, one after the other, and the first one had an earlier ksuba. The second one had a later ksuba, and he only owned one piece of real estate, which had a shibud to both of these ksubas. However, the value of that particular piece of real estate, let's say that field, was less than the value of the two ksubos. So in effect, there's only enough of a shibud on that sada for a supply for one of the two ksubos. U'machar sadehu, and the husband sold the field, the kasva rishona l'lokeach, and the first wife, the earlier wife, wrote a shtar to the purchaser in which it says, Din udvarim eli imach. I am misalek es atzmi from all schus that I have in this shibud, which means I'm forfeiting my rights to collect the ksuba from your sada, the sada that you purchased. However, there's a second wife, and she did not sign a similar document. She never waived her rights to collect from the lokech, and therefore shnia motzia me'alokech. Okay, now, after the second wife confiscates the karka of the purchaser in lieu of the debt to her ksuba, now she has possession over this karka. However, we have halacha that a Baal Chov Rishon has first rights to collect from the Shubadim above and beyond the Baal Chov Sheni. And therefore the Mishnah Paskins, her Rishona, Minashniya, the Rishona takes the Sadeh out of the possession of the Shniya. So again, the Rishona did not have the legal rights to collect from the Lokeach because she had signed the shtar of Din Udvarim Eli Imach, which she gave up her rights to collect from that shibud, but she has rights to take it out of the hands of the Shniya because her ksuba came earlier than that of the Shniya. Okay, now what happens is the first wife is now in possession of this sada. Well, wait a second. The Lokeach has rights to the sada. He paid for the sada. And in the confrontation, so to speak, between the Lokeach and the Rishona, the Lokeach has the upper hand because the Rishona had signed such a document in which he waived her rights to collect from this field, from that Lokeach. And therefore, Lokeach, Mina Rishona, he comes back and he confiscates the karka from the Rishona with his claim, wait a minute, you committed yourself not to take the sada that I purchased out of my possession to be torifed in lieu of the shibud. You gave up on that right. Okay, so now where are we? We've made a circle, full swing around, because we're back to square one, in which case the Lokeach is holding on to the field that he purchased. And if so, the Shniya can now collect from the Lokeach, because she never signed a document giving up on her rights of Din Udvarim. But once she collects it, then the Shniya comes back, the Rishona comes back and says, well, I'm going to confiscate the karka because I'm a Baal Chov Rishon, the Chozeres Chalila, and now the Lokeach is going to rip the karka out of the hands of the Rishona. But the very moment that he does so, the Shniya comes and collects the field and rips it out of the hands of the Lokeach. And once that happens, we're in a magal, we're in a vicious cycle. And the Mishnah Paskins, Chozeres Chalila, goes on and on and on. Ad sheyasu pshar b'neihem. Two out of these three will have to make a compromise. For example, perhaps the Lokeach of the second wife will sign some sort of an agreement in which the second wife gives up on her rights to collect the soda and the toref, the soda confiscated from the hands of the lokeach, and the lokeach, from his point of view, now gains possession over the karka. They're going to split the value of the karka, leaving the Rishona out in the cold. But that's the pshar that they can make when the two forces join together to form a sort of cartel. Now the Mishnah goes on to say that this kind of situation could occur in other scenarios in which, again, we'll have a choseres chalila situation, a vicious cycle that goes around and around. And to break that cycle, we need to get two out of the three parties to agree to a pshara at the expense of the third party. V'chein balchov. So we have something in the case of balchov, a lover who is meshubad to pay a debt that he borrowed money for, and now he sells his karka. He's got two karkos. He sells them to two people, and once again, what's going to happen is that if one of those, if the lover gives up, if the malva gives up his rights to collect from one of these two lekuchos, that's going to be at the expense of the second, of the second, let's say, malva, if there are two sodos. And again, it's going to be choser chalila. V'chein isha balas chov. Also, let's say a woman is collecting, she's demanding the payment of a ksuba. Her husband sold his karkos to two people. In all these cases, we're going to have a vicious cycle, ad sheyasu pshar beineim, and the Gemara is going to go into detail about these cases. The Gemara right away raises the question, is there any validity legally to that shtar that the Isha, in this case the Rishona, wrote to the Lokeach, Dinu Dvarim Einli Imach? Every shtar and every agreement, every akna and any sort of a kinyan requires what we call full-fledged das. But in the case of a married woman who wants to satisfy her husband, make sure he's happy, she doesn't do this out of the genuine sincerity of her heart, my hobby. For Asanya, we have a brisa that establishes a principle called Nachas Ruach Asisi L'Baili. How so? The brisa says, "Ha'omer l'chad beiro," man says to his friend, "Dinu dvar mein li'al sada zu mainly asik ba v'yadei mesulekas even alama klum." So in general, when a person is misalik himself from shutvis, he was a shutaf, and now he wants to give up on his shutvis, and he writes a shtar that says, "Ein li al sada zu dinu dvar ein li asik ba v'yadei mesulekas even." That's called siluk. When you own something, you have to be makna in a positive way. You can't be misalik yourself from the kingdom. And therefore, since the shutaf has ownership in the merchandise, he cannot just make a statement, "I'm being misalik myself." Now, at this point, the Ktsos HaChoshen, who lived about 2 centuries ago, a little bit less maybe, comes forward and he says, "I don't understand the Gemara's question. How could the Gemara set up an analogy, a comparison between a case of shutfim and the case of an isha? A woman is giving up her rights to collect something. She has, through the shibud of Haksuba, a zchus mamon to collect from the lokeach. If she wants to give up on that zchus mamon, that's siluk. She's not actually transferring ownership in a positive way on something that she owns. She's only removing herself from rights that she has in the legal sphere. And for that, siluk should be sufficient. Masechet, in the case of the brisa that the Gemara quotes about shutfim, a shutfim has ownership in the property or in the merchandise, and therefore he has to be makneh shutfis to the other shutaf. He can't do so through siluk by removing himself. You need a positive aknah. And in order to answer this question about what the Gemara's question is based on, the Ktsos comes up with a pretty radical answer. And he says the following, that there's something called karka she'ein ba kedei chaluka. In other words, it's less than Daled Amos, and therefore you cannot make a chaluka on that karka. And the Ran says in the Dorim that in a case of ein bo chaluka, then each shutav has a kinyan on half of the karka. He's allowed to use the other half of the karka through the laws of shibudim. And when our brisa says that siluk doesn't work, it means that it doesn't work even in the case of a karka she'ein bo din chaluka. Now, I understand on that half of the field that this shutaf has a kinyan aguf on, he cannot be misalek. But why does the brisa dismiss and disqualify this siluk? The siluk should be operative and meaningful on the second half of the karka, vis-a-vis which the shutaf has a shibud which tamshus b'chelik hasheni shel karka. From the fact that the siluk is completely rejected, you see that dinu dvarim ein li'imach doesn't even work to remove a shibud. So how can a woman in a valid contract use dinu dvarim ein li b'chasayach legabei v'lokeach to remove herself from the shibud that this karka has vis-a-vis the collection of Aksuba? So the Gemara answers that they made a kinyan sudar. It wasn't just a shtar, which was a shtaraya that was written as edus and as testimony. There was a kinyan that was done. And if there was a kinyan, then it's not just that she's being mavater on her monetary rights to collect from that field. It's much more than that. She's being makna hashibudim to the lokeach. Okay, fine. You've circumvented the issue of how this transfer operates and is valid, but you have another more fundamental issue, and that is: does she really have full-fledged gemiras das with a sincere decision on her part to remove herself from that shiva? The economy yodamai havi. Tema, she should be able to claim vis-a-vis the lokeach, nachas ruach hasisi lebayli. The only reason I agreed to remove my schuyot was to facilitate my husband's ability to sell you the karka. You were very hesitant about buying the karka. And the reason for that was well founded because you were afraid that vis-a-vis my ksuba, you'd eventually lose that karka because there's a shibud on that karka. So in order to make my husband very happy, so that he could transfer ownership of this karka and the lokech would agree to buy the karka, I removed my shibud, but I really had no sincere desire and agreement to that sale that would remove my shibud, my ability to collect my ksuba. I need my ksuba. And Milo Tnan, we have a Mishnah Masechet Gittin, Lokach mina ish, v'chazav lokach mina isha. If a sada was designated for the purpose of collection of a woman's ksuba, and he, the Baal, sold the karka, on which there was a special, unique shibud, like a kind of a potaki, for the collection of a ksuba, v'chazar v'lokach mina isha. Now the lokech goes back to the woman, and he wants to get her agreement to validate that machir in an absolute way so that she won't collect that and confiscate that karka when the day comes for her collection of the ksuba. So they made a kinyan. And the Mishnah in Gittin says that mekho batal, the kinyan is worthless. Why? What's wrong with this kinyan? She removed her rights from the field that was purchased by the buyer. Alma, we have to conclude that Yecholi Shetomer Nachas Ruach Hasisi L'Bayli. The Mishnah is predicated on the assumption that her askama for this mechira was only achieved because she wanted to make her husband happy, but it's not a real gemiras das, and therefore we have now a steer, we have a contradiction of Mishnayos, because clearly our Mishnah recognizes the Dinu Dvarim Einli Imach agreement of the Isha vis-a-vis the Lokeach, and yet the Mishnah Gittin completely invalidates the Dinu Dvarim Einli Imach based on the claim of Nachas Ruach Asisi L'Bayil. Rabbi Seira, Rabbi Fizlo Kasha, Ha Rabbi Meir, Ha Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir denies the claim of Nachas Ruach Asisi L'Bayil. Our Mishnah reflects his shita. The Mishnah Gittin, on the other hand, reflects is authored by Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that that's a valid claim that Nachas Ruach Asisi L'Bayil. This Sanya, and where do we have a record of this machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir? And I'm going to give a little bit of a preview of coming attractions. The truth is that Rabbi Meir also agrees fundamentally to Rabbi Yehuda's principle of a claim, a valid claim of Nachas Ruach Asisi L'Bayil to cancel the agreement. But this is an exceptional case, as we'll soon see, where there was a Rishon and a Sheni. That's where Rabbi Meir is going to reject Nachas Ruach Asisi L'Bayil. Now let's just emphasize, by way of introduction to the Brisa we're about to learn, that there's a principle called Ein Nifrayim Min Nechasim Mishubadim B'Makom Sheyesh B'nei Chorim. So it works like this. Normally, if all things are equal, when the Malva comes to claim from the Lova doesn't have any cash to pay back the loan, he collects from the Lova's Baininus, which is the middle level of the quality of the karka. However, let's say the Baininus was sold to a Lokeach, and all that the Lova has in his possession is Ziburis. In such a case, Lokeach has rights to say to the Malva, go collect from the Lova Ziburis, because that's called B'nei Chori, as opposed to my Baininus, which is Mishubad, which is Mishubadim. Mishubadim meaning it was bought by the Lokeach. So let's read the Brisa now, and we're talking about a person who has two fields, and he sells both fields to two people. Because of the Rishon, below Chasmalo. Okay, now we have an identity of this man who sells the two fields. Who is this man? Till now, we just called him an Adam, but now we have a specific name for him. He's the Baal. And he has a shibud on his nechasim to his wife to collect the ksuba. Now he sells both these fields. He writes a shtar to the first one, and velo chasmalo. His wife does not agree to sign on as an agreeing partner in this sale. She's not willing to give up and waive her rights to collect her ksuba from this lokeach. Then, when this Baal writes a second shtar, selling his second field, chasmalo, she actually agrees to the sale. She signs on the document, indicating that she has waived her rights to collect her ksuba from that second piece of karka. Says Rabbi Meir, Ibda ksubasa. Unfortunately, she cannot collect her ksuba, not from the first buyer, nor from the second buyer. Now, wait a second. we understand very well that she cannot collect Ketuvot from the second buyer because chasmalo, she already gave up her rights to collect that character from the second lokeh. But why does she lose from the first one? And the answer is that as far as the first one, she cannot claim her rights to shibudim on the first piece of sadeh because at that moment in time, the Baal was still holding on to another field. He hadn't yet sold it to the second buyer. And therefore, the Lokeach Rishon has a right to say, he nachti loch makom ligvosim, and I left b'nei chori a karka, a sada in the hands of the Baal. He's the one who owes you the ksuva. Go collect that from him. Now the Baal takes that sada and sells it with a chasima, an agreement of the Isha, to a second buyer. Well, since she signed on that second buyer, on that second sale, she no longer has rights to collect her ksuva from the second lokeh. So she's left, as we say proverbially, kerech mikan umikan. We see here that Rabbi Meir rejects the principle which immediately we're going to formulate in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, that she could claim, oh, I signed on the shtar only to make my husband happy, but I wasn't sincere about it. But again, we have to keep in mind, that's because she didn't sign on the first shtar. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yechola hi shetomar nachas ruach hasisu baili. Atem malochem olai. She can claim against the lokeach, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that although she in fact, again, she has no claim against the first lokeach because hinachti loch makom ligvosto. But vis-a-vis the second lokeach, you think, Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi Yehuda, you think that she gave up on her right? She didn't give up her right. She was just being nice to her husband. That's all. So we have a machlokas tanoim now. Does a woman have a valid claim? And that's how we can answer Rav Zera as far as the steer between the two mishnayos. So the Gemara asks, "V'Rebbe sasam lahacha k'Rebbe Meir sasam lahasam k'Rabbi Yehuda." Both our Mishnah here in the Masechet Ksubos, as well as the Mishnah in Gittin, are stam mishnayos. We have a principle that stam Mishnah k'Rabbi Meir. So that's why our Mishnah that rejects her claim of nachas ruach asisi l'baili reflects the principle of stam Mishnah k'Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir rejects the principle of stam of nachas ruach asisi l'baili. But now, when Rebbe gets to the Mishnah in Gittin, he's so saying the Mishnah according to Rabbi Yehuda as a contradiction to the first Mishnah, the name of the Mishnah in the Masechet Ksubos. And therefore, the Gemara now comes up with an alternative answer to the stira in the Mishnayos. Amar Papa begrusha b'divrei hakol. How a Mishnah is talking about a case of a grusha. Which means the following: that at what point in time did the husband actually sell the field to the buyer? It was only after the get was delivered. And then she writes to the lokeach, "Dinu dvarim ein limach," and divrei hakol, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree and concede in this case that she doesn't have a right to claim nachas ruach asisi l'baili. She's already divorced, and therefore her chasima on a shtar that says dinu dvarim ein limach is valid, and she loses and forfeits her rights to collect mishubanim from that lokeach. Rav Ashi offers an alternative reconciliation of the two mishnayos. Kula Rabbi Meir, and that makes sense because Stam Mishnah is ki Rabbi Meir. So even the Mishnah in Masechet Gittin is Rabbi Meir. I can't look over Rabbi Meir Hasam. When does Rabbi Meir say, as we saw in the Brisa, that a woman does not have rights to say nachas ruach asisi l'baili? Eina ella, it only applies to shnei lekuchos. When the Baal wrote to the Rishon, the woman refused to sign on that shtar. And then he wrote his field away to the Sheni, and she did agree to sign on it. The Amri Le, when she claims Nachas Ruach Sisi L'Bayla, I'm going to say to wait a minute. He said the Nachas Ruach Avadet is L'Kami Boyle L'Memet. Why did you wake up when your husband sold the second field on the second round? And then you said, oh, I object to this Mechira. And now you're claiming, no, you didn't really mean it sincerely. You only did it to make your husband happy, get a smile on his face. Well, why didn't you do so on the first round? And that's our Mishnah. So our Mishnah reflects the situation in which Rabbi Meir rejects the principle in this particular application of Nachas Ruach HaSisi L'Bayla, because she's not consistent. She should have written that same shtar for the first Mechira. But as far as the Mishnah Gittin is concerned, where there was only one sale, Rabbi Meir Modeh, even Rabbi Meir accepts the basic principle of Nachas Ruach HaSisi L'Bayla, like Rabbi Yehuda. And he has no machlokas against Rabbi Yehuda as far as invalidating her chasim on the shtar to the lokech because Nachas Ruach HaSisi L'Bayla, and there's only one lokeach. And therefore we have no kasha against her as to why she was quiet on the first round, and now all of a sudden she woke up. Umasnisin, but the Mishnah that says in Gittin that according to Rabbi Meir, both Mishnahs of Rabbi Meir, but that a woman cannot claim a Nachas Ruach HaSisi L'Bayla, that's the case of the Kosav Li'acher. What does it mean, the Kosav Li'acher? Before the Baal sold the field to Lokeach number one, and the woman did not sign the shtar, and then he sold the second field to a second Lokech, and she signed on it. And only in that case does Rabbi Meir argue that she forfeits her right to claim Nachas Ruach HaSisi L'Bayla. But the Mishnah Gittin, so that's our Mishnah. The Mishnah Gittin is talking about Lokech Echad, and even Rabbi Meir agrees that she has a right to claim Nachas Ruach HaSisi L'Bayla. Tanan Hasam, we learned in the Mishnah Gittin, even if what's left in the possession of the Lova is Ziburis, and the Lokech purchased from the Lova, Beinan is, nevertheless, the Malva cannot claim he wants and insists that he wants. Beinan is from the Lokech, he has to collect from Ziburis of Bnei Chori that are in the hands of the Lova. Iboilahu ishtaduf b'nei chori mahu. What happens if the field that was left in the possession of the Lova, that's called the b'nei chori, was inundated and completely ruined? You can't plant anything there. Mal de litrov mimishavde, can the Malva now claim, look, it's true that normally I would have to collect from the Bnei Chori in the possession of the Lova, but now that Bnei Chori is worthless. It's already been destroyed. So can you give me rights now to collect from the Lokeach? And the Pnei Yoshua explains that Stadei Asofik. And it all has to do with the separate takana that the Chachamim instituted, that you cannot collect from a Shubadim when they're Bnei Chori. What is the motivation for that takana? Is it A or B? A, it's because of Hefseid HaLekuchos. Lekuchos have a right to say, we did and acted properly by buying this field because we left Bnei Chori in the hands of the Lova for the Malva to collect them. Or no, the main motivation for this Takanas Chachamim was because the Malva is not losing anything. And we're saying to the Malva, look, even though you're going to have to give up your rights to collect from the Meshubadim and confiscate the property from the hands of the Lokeach, nevertheless, you don't lose anything. But this second explanation is based on the fact that the Shibud Aguf, the real fundamental Shibud, is on the Lovan. So we're not really coming to undermine a shibud of the malva by saying that he cannot collect from the lekuchos, because his real fundamental primary shibud is vis-a-vis the lova, and the lova has been a chori. And the nafkamina between these two definitions, says the Pnei Yoshua, is the case with the field that's left in the hands of the lova was miskalkel. If we're going to say the takana is on behalf of the lekuchos, as long as they acted properly and they went out of their way deliberately to leave b'nei chori in the hands of the lova for the sake of the malva's collection, then in this case also they acted properly. It never occurred to them, and it never passed their minds to anticipate that maybe the field would go under. However, if we're going to say that the thrust of the takana was motivated because the malva is not losing anything, why isn't the malva losing anything? Because he's going to collect from the ikra shibud, which is the shibud aguf, from the b'nei chori. But here, the malva has no recourse to collect from b'nei chori, and therefore the malva is going to take a loss. We don't have to worry about the loss of the lekuchos, because the karka that they purchased was karka mishubedes lebal chol. So once again, if we're going to say that the thrust of this takana is on behalf of the lekuchos, then tough luck as far as the malva is concerned. He cannot collect from the lekuchos, because they could say we acted kedasu kedin and bokaminichu, we left you karka. If on the other hand the thrust of the takana is because the ikar shibud of the malva is to the lova, then in such a case, that the malva will suffer a hefsed because he cannot collect from the lova, then we don't have to care and concern ourselves with the hefsed lekuchos. Toshma, we learned in the brisa, kosav lilokea rishon v'lo chosmalo lokeach sheni v'chosmalo. So she waived her rights to collect from the lokeach sheni, but not from lokeach rishon. Is Rabbi Meir holds that ivdok subasa, she can't collect her ksuba not from the rishon, not from the sheni. Rabbi Meir yisal kedai toch ishtaduf b'nei chori torif mi mishabdei. And if you're going to claim that the malva has rights to go back to the lokeach and be torif in a case where the b'nei chori became mikul kolim, is nehide ibek suba mishenim berishon biyotikve. Okay, I know that she cannot claim her ksuba from the lokeach sheni because she gave up on that when she signed the shtar, but why can't she claim from the rishon? The rishon is going to say, look, when we bought that first karka, we left you b'nei chori with the second sada that was in the possession, in the hands of the Baal, who's like the lovet. No. That's not going to be a valid claim because she now has no other sada to collect from. Why? Because with regard to the second sada, she already gave up her rights to collect from the second sada. So let her collect from the first sada, and we don't have to worry about the hefsed and lekuchos. From the fact that the Shita Rabbi Meir is clearly that Ivdok Subasa, both from the Rishon and from the Sheni, we see that this takana was made on behalf of Lekuchos, and it's an ironclad absolute takana. The Lekuchos always have the right to say, we acted properly, Kedasu Kedin, and we left you a karka, b'nei chori, in the hands of the Balchol, of the Mechuyev. The Gemara rejects this proof from Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my Ivda Misheni. Since she signed the shtar of Dinu Dvarim Ainli Alai for the second Mechira, therefore she removed herself from the second Mechira, and she cannot collect from the second Lokeach, but she does have rights to collect from the first Lokeach. And that's because the Bnei Chori on miscalcul, so to speak. Omar Rav Shtei Tshuvas B'Davri, two reasons why I reject Rav Nachman's interpretation and Ukimta of the mission of Ivdok Subasa. Number one, the Chadot, Ibda legami mashma. The word ibda means she lost her ksuba. It's not collectible neither from the first nor the second. The Od, and furthermore, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, lava mina echad umochan achosav l'shnayim. Because of al chov lokech sheni dinu dvarim ein limach ein lo alokeach rishon klum. The sheyochel loma hinachti lecha makom ligos mena. This brisa records explicitly that even as far as the Lokech Sheni is concerned, even as far as Lokech Rishon is concerned, there is no recourse to take the karka out of the hands of the Lokech Rishon, because he has absolute rights to say, Hinachti l'chal makom. Your Bnei Chori, I left you a second field. So we see that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's answer is totally contradicted by this brisa. And then we go back to the original proof that we had from the brisa that the Malva, if he cannot collect from Lokech Sheni, because Lokech Rishon has a valid claim of Hinachtu Chol Makom, he cannot claim even in this situation where he's given up on his rights to collect from Lokech Sheni. And therefore, Rava says that this has no proof to the case of miskalkul, because miskalkul is sudden when the field was inundated, meaning the karka that was left in the hands of the Lova B'nai Chori. That's circumstances beyond your control. But Hassam, in the brises that we quoted above, iu the afsida nafshi b'yadayin. It was the Malva who messed himself up, because he closed off the avenue of collection from the Sheni by writing Dinu Dvar Mein Limach. That was his choice decision, or the woman who signed the second shtar, that was her volition and initiative to give up on the second karka. She can't come back to Lokech Rishon because she herself boxed herself into the situation where on the one hand, Lokech Rishon says he not makom. As far as Lokech Sheni, she wrote but in the case where the karka got inundated in a divine act that was beyond human control, I'm not sure what the din would be. Is there a possibility of now collecting from the Lokeach, saying that the Bnei Chori are impossible and we don't want to cause a hefsek to the Malva? Amalei Rav Yemar Rav Ashi. I don't understand your whole suffix about a case where the Sada was miscalculated as to whether or not the Lokech Rishon still has a valid claim of Hinachti L'chal Makom. And here we're going to turn to Daf Tzadi Hey Omid Beis.